Gunfighters, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. What are we going to talk about today specifically? Hollow point technology, defensive ammo tech. There's a lot of marketing hype, there's a lot of this term versus that term. Chemical bonding, mechanical bonding, expansion versus penetration. We're going to dive into that. We're going to examine that today. With that, I'm going to plug in the bio, and then we'll get into the main topic. So, who am I? Who is this person talking to you from across the internet? Why should you listen? First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life where I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, L.A.P.D. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion. And West Coast Regional Rifle Champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Melito. Welcome to the podcast. Now, gunfighters, let's talk about understanding defensive handgun ammunition, how it works. You see, handgun bullet tech has come, I think, a lot farther in the past 20 years, 15 years, and exponentially more in the last 10 years, I would say. Far more even than the handguns. The biggest thing to come into defensive handguns, I think, in the past 10 years has been good quality, reliable optics. But you look at a Gen 5 Glock 17, looks remarkably similar to a Gen 1 Glock 17, which came out in the 80s. You know, the Beretta 92, the SIG 226, these are still fine combat handguns. But ammunition is far more effective. That's why we see a big swing back to 9mm, or to 9mm, I should say. How is that? Why is that so? And how does it all work? If you care about that kind of stuff, if you don't just want to load up your Glock 19 with whatever the guy at the gun store said was good, if you want to peel that back and get into, let's call it gunfighter tech, let's talk about that. Let's talk about a baseline. Why does the military use full metal jackets? What did the police use for a long time before modern expanding hollow point bullets? So the military, per the Hague Convention, not the Geneva Convention as is often misquoted, but per the Hague Convention, they generally carry full metal jackets. And I say generally, there are some exceptions. But for your average infantryman, your average tanker that's going to have a handgun, I have my primary MOS in both branches of the military was infantry, and I was also 1st Cavalry. But anyway, why do they use full metal jackets? Kind of because they have to, right? It's not the best. Also, it is better for penetration. So there is that. And basically for modern semi-automatic bullets, you're talking a lead core bullet encased in a copper jacket. Now, that's kind of a misnomer, FMJ. A lot of what's called FMJ will generally have sometimes a base at the bottom where you can see the lead. But anyway, the common vernacular is full metal jacket. Also, for decades and decades, police used revolvers primarily and .38 Special. There were exceptions. There were early adopters of the autoloader, but for a long time, up into the 90s, I'd say the vast majority of police officers, of which I also was one, and I came in right at the tail end of this when we still had police officers, even L.A.P.D, still carrying wheel guns, revolvers. But for decades and decades, police carried revolvers, and they oftentimes carried it with just a cast lead round. And different departments carry different things. They're a lot more heterogeneous than the military's homogeneous ammo selection. They have a lot of different ones per department, right? What L.A.P.D carries could differ greatly from what N.Y.P.D carries, and very greatly from what the F.B.I carries and the air marshals carry, or the border patrol carries. You get the idea there. For a long time, the vast majority, I think, of law enforcement in this country carried revolvers and .38 Special, or .38 Special plus P, with basic lead round. A lead round nose 158 grain, or a lead semi-wad cutter 148 grain, or something like that. This very basic bullet. Because that was kind of the technology that was available. At least the proven technology that was available. And to understand why we progress from there, we must first understand that the handgun is not known for having a lot of stopping power. Right? If you told me today that I was going to get into a gunfight and I couldn't avoid it because other people's lives are on the line and they might die if I didn't get in one, because as I've stated previously, I am a man acquainted with violence. I'm familiar with the taste and I can swallow it if need be, but I'd rather have a healthier diet. But if I had to, and you told me I was going to get into a gunfight, I would not choose a handgun. I would choose a shotgun primarily, and if the range was longer, I'd choose a rifle. I wouldn't choose a handgun. They're far less powerful. Look at the amount of power in like a 12-gauge buckshot load or a 12-gauge slug, or even a relatively small, less powerful rifle round, the 223-556, compared to a handgun round. It's far more. At least for we're talking about defensive handgun rounds. I mean, you can get a quote-unquote handgun in like a 30-30 if you want to. But I'm talking actual like combat fighting handguns. And they're harder to shoot. So that being said, you must understand first that we carry handguns because that's the best option at the time. Even as a cop, even if I have a shotgun in the center of my cruiser, I'm not carrying that into every single call, right? I'm not walking up to every single car that I pull over with a shotgun pointed at them. It just is not practical, and it's not culturally acceptable. Much like, even though it might technically be legal to walk around Las Vegas with an AR-15 slung over your shoulder, just walking around downtown the Strip, technically legal, I do believe, unless they've changed some laws or something, but not a good idea, not wise day to day. So we have a handgun because it's convenient, because as I'm saying this, I can draw a handgun from concealment quicker than I could say it and have it ready to go. So realize that in the first place, handguns are not great fighting implements, as much as I love them. As much as I have won more competitions with handgun than anything else, as much as I carry a handgun day to day, but I have that for convenience because it's usually the best option that I can have on me. And for that reason, as time progressed and technology got better, we looked at making handgun ammunition more effective. Well, getting into that, how does handgun ammunition kill? It penetrates deep enough to get the stuff that matters, and it destroys tissue. As simply as I can define it, right? You look at a very common 9mm loading for total energy, let's call it 350 foot-pounds of energy, which doesn't have to mean anything to you, but just know if I took a similar amount of energy with a bowling ball and hit you in the chest, it probably wouldn't kill you. It may if you have a pacemaker or something, but it's probably not going to kill you because it doesn't penetrate deep enough, even though it has the same amount of energy. Conversely, the full metal jacket, going back to what the military uses, it'll definitely penetrate deep enough. Generally, it'll penetrate several people, which is another problem, over penetration, which we might address later. But a lot of that, if it goes out the other side, that energy is not deposited in the intended target that you need to stop doing whatever they're doing. The reason you shot them in the first place is to change their behavior, right? To get them to stop doing something bad. I'm addressing this to good guys with a gun. You want to dump more of that energy into the intended target and disrupt more tissue. And important tissue. We're talking about It's having them give up because they decide they don't want to get shot again, but actually physically stopping them. I'm not going to get into different targeting places, central nervous system versus cardiovascular system and all that, but just concede that is the goal for this discussion. We haven't even started talking about bullet tech yet. So if we get the bullet to expand, the more it expands, the more tissue it disrupts, and the less it penetrates. Think about, to put it simply, if I'm shoving something through a medium with the same amount of force, the wider that thing is, the less it's going to penetrate. So the more I get the bullet to expand, the less it's going to penetrate. And this is a balancing act, right? I want it to expand, but I don't want it to expand too much, because if it expands too much, it won't penetrate deep enough. And again, we have to get to the important tissue. One of the best repeatable and scientifically consistent things that we generally use, or has been established, whether I agree with it or not, is ordnance gel. Sometimes referred to as ballistics gel, but actual ordnance gel made from tissue of actual living things that have been rendered down. We're not going to argue whether that's the best or not best. That has kind of been established as what we use. And bullet manufacturers, and there are many, and they do a lot of different things. The vast majority are going to be a hollow point or hollow cavity. I won't get into the difference there is. But to get that bullet to peel back, they want some kind of media to go into that cavity and force the bullet apart, to peel back like a flower. This is what you see when you see these nice, pretty expanding hollow points. Now, I should say there are a few exceptions that apply to this rule, especially if you get into like the 357 Magnum and really fast loads. Sometimes you'll just have a partial jacketed bullet with a lead nose on it, but no hollow point or hollow cavity. These are generally just called soft point bullets. Like a 357 Magnum, 158 grain, they can be a good choice. But for most other things, you're going to have a hollow point or hollow cavity. You're going to have that copper jacket on the bullet go up to the top of that hollow point. And when it hits, again, whatever it is, tissue, water, ballistics, medium, gets into that and forces it open. Talking about a tremendous amount of force. Get an idea, take an average hollow. That's not in a bullet, just a bullet, not an entire round. Don't do this with a whole round, that would be dangerous. But just a bullet, just a projectile, and put it, down on something with the hollow point facing down, and hit it with a hammer and see how many times and how hard you have to hit it to get it to expand the way that they do in their shot and hit something. Tremendous amount of force, but it causes this to peel back. And that's a basic hollow point, just a lead core bullet with a copper jacket with a hollow cavity drilled in the top. This is a very basic, let's call it very early generation of hollow point, and they can be quite effective. In fact, I think some of the really early 38 specials didn't even have a jacket. They would just literally have a lead bullet with a hollow point in it, but that's kind of an aside. Most of them have a copper jacket. To get them to expand more, let's say symmetrically or whatever, they may do some scoring, meaning they kind of pre-cut the jacket on the copper to make it peel back in petals. You'll see this a lot in nice pretty pictures. How they get it to do that uniformly is they pre-cut it. So when that bullet goes to expand, it's going to expand in the path of least resistance, and that jacket's already been cut, so those spread apart, making those petals. It's another part of bullet tech, pre-scoring the jacket. A lot of modern hollow points will have this. And when this era kind of came around with hollow points, we get into the problem of the copper jacket coming off of the core. Now, some people will say this is not a problem. I like having multiple wound channels. Let the whole thing fly apart. But in general, and in my opinion as well, I think the vast majority of, let's say, tactical opinion is you want it to stay together. And there's different ways to do this. This is generally what's referred to as a bonded bullet. Now, there's two ways to bond the jacket. Well, there's multiple ways, but two main ways, and many different subcategories, but two main ways to bond the jacket to the core, the lead core and the copper jacket. Chemical bonding and mechanical. One of the fairly early, been around for a while now, but really good versions of this, the Federal HydroShock 1 The original Hydroshock, I believe, and double check all this, by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established, and I can get some of this wrong. But the original Hydroshock, which was a real early common, I believe, police-issued load, was not bonded. The HST went to this technology, and it's a fine bullet. I used that the HST. Probably dealt with some earlier, just regular Hydroshocks. I definitely remember the HSTs, and they're still around, and they're good ammunition. From research I've done, it's a mechanical locking system. You could call that bonding or not bonding, but they use a mechanical system, I do believe, on the HST. Keep the copper jacket on the core. The Winchester Ranger ammunition, which has a really good reputation, which I'm looking at a picture of a box of it, and it says right on the box, bonded, jacketed, hollow point. Remington Golden Saber. These are also real common in civilian. A lot of these are common for civilians, concealed carry as well, but common in police use. The Remington Golden Sabers. It says right on the thing, bonded. It says right on the box, bonded. I think they may also have some earlier versions that aren't bonded, but you can definitely get them in a bonded version. And if this is true, again, verify this, but per Spear on Spear.com, the Gold Dot, perhaps the most common defensive handgun ammunition. Gold Dot was the first handgun ammunition loaded with true bonded core bullets. Using our exclusive unicore method, we bond the jacket to the core 1 molecule at a time at the very beginning of the bullet construction process. This virtually eliminates core jacket separation. And they have a very good reputation for more than just this reason, but they have a really good reputation, a street-proven reputation. They are bona fide, as you might say, the Spear Gold Dots. And they're a bonded bullet. Now, let's look at some other ways to keep this together. There is the Golden Saber Black Belt, the most radical designs that I'm aware of. And this literally has a belt of metal as a belt, like a tactical girdle, right? Holding everything in. Maybe a tactical weightlifting belt, maybe tacticooler, right? But it holds everything together to stop it from spilling out all over the place. That's a very unique technology, and to be fair, whether good or bad, I'm not sure. It's been around a few years now. I remember seeing it, I think, several years ago. So that is out there. It is a literal belt around the bullet to hold it together, and I think to control expansion. So the idea, I think, is it would expand and keep everything together, but not go past the point of that belt. Another real popular one, and it has been around quite a while. I still think of it as a new bullet, but to be fair, I think it's been around probably more than a decade or so. Is more recently than that adopted by the F.B.I, but it was around before that and available to civilians, I do believe. And that's the Hornady 135 grain critical duty. And per this one source, again, verify this information, Hornady uses an interlock band to hold the bullet jacket to the core rather than using a chemical bonding process, often used by other manufacturers. It also uses an antimony core, which if you don't know, I don't mention it in the bio, but I've reloaded since I was a boy. I don't reload right now because I live neo-nomadically. But antimony is something you add to lead to make it harder. So because they use this band, they say that they can also use a less malleable core. And a hard lead like that can have advantages, especially in barrier penetration, especially like car windshields and things like that. So, and again, this round has got some street cred now. It's adopted by the F.B.I. quite a while ago, not like this year or anything. There's some interesting bullet tech there. It's mechanically joined together, and it has antimony, just a hardener in the lead. Also, I chose this bullet at this point to talk about another thing that is not completely unique to Hornady, but they've been doing it a long time in their handgun bullets. It was common long before that in rifle bullets, but they use a pre-existing medium to fill in their hollow in their projectile. You see, it's a pretty well known in the tactical circles, this phenomenon where a bullet just going straight into tissue will expand nicely, but when it goes through, let's say, a jacket or denim, the hollow point can get clogged up. And not all media that gets in there will cause the bullet to expand. Well, Hornady, a lot of their bullets will use this, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's some kind of synthetic material, whether it's silicone or rubber or something like that. Forgive me, I don't know. They call it a flex tip, but it basically stands in. It's like a stand-in for flesh to give a hydraulic expansion already. So it won't get clogged, or at least it shouldn't if the tip stays in there. It shouldn't get clogged with other media because it's already pre-clogged, if you will. Something that will cause the bullet to expand. It's not unique to this one Hornady bullet, even to Hornady, but they do it in a lot of their critical duty, critical defense line of ammo. I've heard them referred to as the clown bullets because they have like a red nose on them. But that's the idea, that's the tech behind that. So if you look at just that one bullet, there's a lot of tech in that bullet, right, to get all this to work right. There's a lot of mechanical engineering and hydraulic expansion and inertia and physics. There's a lot that goes into these hunks of copper and lead that you send out of your barrel. Just looking at the projectile, I can also see that it has pre-cuttings or moldings or whatever it is in the jacket, again, to get that nice uniform expansion that we hope for. It doesn't always work that way. A lot of tech in just that one bullet. Another of this latest generation, they have the G2. Now I think I came across these in person quite a bit when I was doing contracting work. And this was quite a bit after my police career. And they have a very large hollow point cavity on top. These are 147 projectiles in the 9mm. I don't know if they make them in other calibers. But my personal experience with these is in the 147 grain 9mm, they have a quite large, not only hollow point, but a very soft and very large, again, whether it's rubber or silicone or something, tip on the top of it. Much larger than the Hornady ones. Again, Spear Hydroshock was one of the originals. The HST has a good rep, and the G2, I think, brings a lot to the table as far as bullet tech goes. Actually, I'm looking on one of the specs of it, and they call it elastomer. I don't know what that actually is, but that's what they call it. That squishy tip on the bullet. And it says the gold dot. This is, I think, something they wrote, so take that for what it's worth. But it says, exclusive gold dot construction virtually eliminates core jacket separation. It says, per what I'm reading, highest scoring performance in F.B.I. testing protocol. So there's some bullet tech there. I'm going to talk about different bullet, and this is from Federal, and this is the Guard Dog. Different tech. It's fairly light for caliber, the Guard Dogs, and I have a magazine of these. This is not my go-to carry ammo. I happen to have a magazine of them. I said fairly light. Generally, 9mm bullets, unless you're talking about some strange or different technology bullet, they generally start at 115 grains. The Federal Guard Dogs are 105. When I talk about the construction, that will quickly become evident as to why I think. These are not actually a hollow point round, but they are expanding. Different tech. You look at them, they just look like a truncated cone, flat point, 9mm bullet. They're completely silver. The case is silver. Should say silver colored. They're obviously not the element of silver. But they're silver colored, both the projectile and the case. But they're not a traditional full metal jacket. Inside the very thin and pre-scored, you can barely see it on there, but pre-scored jacket is a big cavity filled with, again, some kind of polymer, silicone, I don't really know. And when the front of that hits, there's nothing to get clogged because it's just a flat pointed bullet. It squishes, and this is what's supposed to happen, not what always happens with any hollow point. Nothing is 100%, right? But the front of that bullet gets pushed back, and that cavity with that synthetic material in it squishes out, and the pre-scores in the jacket open up. Instead of peeling back from the top like most hollow points, it kind of squishes and the middle of it pops out. And from accounts, for such an unconventional bullet, they work quite well. One advantage to this that comes to mind is to check whether this is legal or not, but some places specifically prohibit hollow point ammunition. Well, this by definition is not a hollow point. There is no hollow point, whether prosecuting attorney would see it that way, I don't know, but I'm just saying it's a completely kind of unique technology. I'm not aware of anybody else that does it. There may be somebody, but pretty unique there. Now let's talk about some other tech. You'll often see on premium defensive loads a sealant, some kind sealing off the primer. That's to stop moisture, and if you have a lot of lube on your gun, lubrication from getting into there and causing a misfire, a hang fire. So that's important, tech for your defensive ammo. So you'll not always, but a lot of times see a nickel-plated case. And these are generally slicker for this first hand a lot from reloading. They generally resize. They die quite a bit easier in my experience and opinion. I have scientific empirical data for that. They seem to a lot slicker than traditional cases. They also tend to get less discolored with, just say, time and use. If it's slicker, it should in theory, right, everything else being equal, and it's generally not, feed better. There's some other defensive ammo tech. And a lot of times, not always, manufacturers will use a low flash powder. You can argue whether this is good or bad, but it's the reasoning behind, the rationale behind this is if you're shooting at night, it won't blind you as much. And if you've ever shot at night, depending on the caliber and the barrel length, it can be quite a lot of muzzle flash. And this low flash powder, as the name indicates, has lower flash. So even more tech. And I know that's a lot to think about and digest. And just know that today I'm trying to stick with established, bona fide, proven loads with, let's call it street cred, right? Real world experience. They've been there and done that. I'm not talking about next new flavor of the month, crazy whiz bang, super lightweight, super high velocity round. It's advertised as being able to kill King Kong and yet not penetrate a piece of drywall. I'm not talking about that. There are some starting to become, say, on the cusp of being around long enough to maybe consider, and that's the solid copper monolithics. No lead at all. They're just made from copper. Certainly been around and proven in the hunting world and rifles. They'll probably go with a more traditional, more proven load, but they are coming along, and that technology is coming along. But just realize there are other technology, but I'm talking about the most common proven kind of defensive handgun ammunition in this episode. So, kind of in summation, what does this all mean for you? Does this mean that you should run out and grab the highest tech, defensive ammunition you can get? No, it doesn't mean that at all. This is to help you understand better. Primarily, and I've talked about this before, you need a round that shoots point of aim, point of impact. Unless you just have so much money that you're going to shoot all the time and train with your defensive ammo, and I think you should train with it a little bit, but if every time you go to the range you're going to run that defensive ammo and money is no object, then you get whatever you want. Most people are going to train usually with a different ammo than they carry. And I would argue the most important thing, making sure that ammo functions in your gun, because even a Glock, I've had this very experience happen, and even really good quality ammo. Actually, I've had this happen twice. Not every gun likes every ammo, every bullet profile. So don't just assume, don't trust your life to something unproven. Don't just assume that the ammo is going to feed in that gun. Make sure it feeds and fires and is reliable, number one. Number two, does it shoot point of aim, point of impact with your training ammo? I don't care how good the bullet technology is. If it does not hit where you are aiming, you're quite literally missing the mark and missing the point. For a bullet to do anything, it must first hit its intended target. You need a bullet that will shoot point of aim, point of impact with your training ammo. Again, unless you're just going to shoot duty ammo all the time. Very blessed when I was a contractor, I kind of had access to a bunch of really good premium defensive ammo. But most of the time, and myself included right now, that's not me. A couple of manufacturers have realized this and gone above and beyond. Or one that stands out is Speer. They have their Lawman series. If you match it up with the grain weight, it should match up with their Speer Gold Dot series. An example would be their 124 grain Lawman and their 124 grain Gold Dot. They're designed to shoot same point of aim, point of impact, and have the same bullet geometry profile minus the hollow point in the training ammo, and much more affordable. Winchester's Train and Defend line, which I haven't seen in a long time. Hopefully it didn't go away with the pandemic or whatnot. But you get the idea. It needs to shoot point of aim, point of impact. So, and I've heard this said and I disagree, that you should carry whatever the local PD carries. And number one, you'd be surprised, not every cop and not every cop in charge of purchasing and stuff like that is savvy on tactical and ballistics know-how. But even if they are you shooting the exact same gun that they are? The answer might be yes. Maybe they carry Glock 17s and you carry a Glock 17. In which case, yeah, you might want to start looking there. If they carry a full-size fighting handgun, let's say a Glock 17, and you carry a Glock 43, there is no guarantee that that bullet is going to work well out of your gun. Hollow points are velocity based. They need a threshold, a certain amount of velocity to expand. When you get a shorter barrel, you get less velocity. There may be some weird exception, but in a handgun, pretty much you cut the barrel down, you get less velocity. So don't assume because they use it in their Glock 17 that it's a good choice for you in your Glock 43. It might be. It might be a horrible choice. So be fairly confident that you can have a bullet that will reasonably expand. And there's always odd things in ballistics. It could hit a bone and do something weird. It could get clogged up, even some of the best hollow points. It could hit a branch on the way to the target and turn sideways. Who knows? But in general, can you reasonably expect that projectile to expand fired out of your handgun? Can you expect it to hit point of aim, point of impact? Here's a big one. Can you afford to shoot it? Perhaps you find a good hollow point that's fairly low tech. It's just a hollow point with a jacket and a lead core, but it expands out of your gun and it shoots point of aim, point of impact, and you can afford to shoot it. You can buy, 200 rounds of it versus 50 rounds of another kind of ammo. Said you do want to train with it a little bit. For you, that might be the best choice. I say all this to say I really want you to think about this. And if you just go and buy whatever's in the shiny box at the sporting goods store and load it in your gun and don't even test fire it, just assume it's going to feed and expand and shoot where you're aiming at in your gun, you're really stacking a lot of uncertainties and unproven things. I'd say even mathematical improbabilities on top of each other for something that could be literally life or death for you or somebody else. If I'm going to a gunfight, I want those criteria checked off for me. And if you're backing me up in a gunfight, I really hope you checked off those boxes for you too. Anyway, some thoughts on defensive ammunition technology. I hope you have enjoyed this podcast. If you thought the content in this was worth the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo, you might consider becoming a patron. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. Also doing a giveaway this month, January, in the year of our Lord 2023, of a SOG fixed blade knife and a bailout bag. So you may want to check that out. Tactical verse of the day is coming at you from Exodus 36. Every gifted artisan in whom the Lord had put wisdom and understanding to know how to do all manner of work for the service of the sanctuary, to do according to all that the Lord had commanded. And that verse reminds me of the Gospels when Jesus talks about the parable of the talents. Whatever gift, whatever abilities you have, whether in shooting or woodworking or masonry or accounting, they're a gift from God. Try and use them for His glory. Gunfighting, I don't think is any different than that. For it is written, the Lord is a man of war. Exodus 15, and we are made in His image. Now for the tactical tip, I talked about the importance of testing out your defensive ammunition. You should also test out your magazines. And you should run some of your defensive ammunition, I think, through the magazines you're going to carry. Could load up them completely with your defensive ammo. It can get rather expensive. In my experience, not super scientifical, but I reckon that you're going to have the highest probability of a malfunction your first couple of rounds or your last couple of rounds in the magazine. In general, it could happen anytime, right? But your first several rounds and your last several rounds, because that's where you have your most spring tension on your magazine and your least spring tension. If you think about that, like your last couple of rounds, you have less spring tension. So if you get a little bit of a lag and that round doesn't get up there fast enough, it can cause a malfunction, a double feed, a stovepipe, or whatever. Also, the first couple of rounds, you have a lot of tension pushing up. It can slow down the slide sometimes. So in general, I think you'll get more propensity for a malfunction in the first couple or last couple of rounds. If you're out training, maybe load the first couple of rounds you load in the magazine and the last couple in the magazine, and run several mags like that, with the middle rounds just being your training rounds. They should, again, if we talked about it, shoot the same point of aim, point of impact anyway. But again, it's a system. It all has to work. If you have the best, most reliable gun in the world and the best ammo and your magazine doesn't work, you see the issue. If you have the best gun and best magazine, super reliable, doesn't feed that bullet profile, it literally gets hung up on the feed ramp, however reliable that gun may be with proper ammo, again, it's a system. So think about that. Anyway, with that, thanks for listening to this somewhat somber and technical edition of Gunfighter Life. Have a blessed day.